Hello, friends. This is Amy C. Wanninger from Lead at Any Level, and you're watching Lead at Any Level Live. This is my Monday, noon Eastern live video show. I will be honest with you, I am not live today. This is a pre-recorded video because I am on vacation with my kids at Disney, and we are probably having a wonderful time and eating way too much junk food, if you want to know the truth about what I'm doing right now. But while I'm recording this, I am very much at home in my studio, and I am so glad to be with you, even if I'm a little bit ahead of you in the world right this minute. But that's okay. We'll catch up and we'll be together soon. Today, I want to talk about an important topic. This is about these surveys that come up at companies where we ask our employees what they think, and then our company gets a really cool little badge and we get some recognition on a website, and we get to tout what a fantastic place we are as an employer. And I'm curious if you've ever taken one of these surveys or worked for a company that takes these surveys. Let me know in the comments what your experience was. I know that these are a great tool for organizations in a lot of ways. One second. One of the ways that these tools work is that they help employers kind of reach certain baseline measures of success for their culture. They help, then they can advertise to prospective employees that, the culture is good. My question with these surveys, though, is always, yeah, you've got the badge. Yeah, you got the banner. Yes, you're listed on the website, you're ranked, whatever. But says who, right? Who says this is a fabulous place to work? Because typically what happens in a lot of organizations, and I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with these surveys, hear me out, but here's what I see happening a lot, is that because there's such an overwhelming majority culture in an organization, for example, the organization is overwhelmingly white or overwhelmingly men or overwhelmingly straight people or overwhelmingly Americans or overwhelmingly whatever the demographic is, overwhelmingly women in some cases. Typically, because the representation is so skewed toward one demographic or another, then the badge comes very easily because for whoever is dominant in the organization, the culture is great, right? But what I think those surveys miss, or what the marketing around the companies that take the surveys and score well enough to be, it's great to work here, companies. One of the things that I think that it's too easy to miss or to overlook, because we've got our banner, we've got our badge, we've got our cookie, and we, it's almost like a participation trophy, right? We feel really good about that we were here, we reached this threshold, now our work is done. And here's what I'm going to ask you. If you are in charge of running these surveys in your organization, or if you're participating in the selection of a survey, or you're part of the marketing of, hey, we made it, we achieved it, now we're good. If you're part of these surveys, I want to challenge you to ask yourself the next question. And the next question is, okay, great. We've been told that we're a wonderful place to work, but for whom? Because if you dig into that data just a little bit, you are likely to find pockets of employees that do not feel like they have a great culture, that do not feel like they have a path to advancement, that do not feel like they are being invested in, that do not feel like their manager has their back. And whether it's one department because of one, untrained or disengaged manager, or whether it's some demographic of people because your policies are not equitable for everybody in the company, not equal, but equitable. There's a difference. You probably have pockets of employees who feel very disengaged, who feel very disenfranchised, who do not feel included or like they belong. And you've probably heard me say this before, but every organization that hires anyone needs to be very intentional about, on the one hand, whom do we want to include, right? This is usually a values-based conversation. It might have to do with capabilities, but whom do we want to include is a really important conversation. And then it's important to know who actually feels included and how much overlap is there. Ideally, those two populations would overlap, right? We know exactly who we want to include. We're not trying to exclude anyone on an illegal or unfair or unreasonable basis. And because we know exactly who we want to include, and we're explicit about that in our words and our deeds and our policies, then the people who actually feel included in our organization are a perfect match. Now, anytime there's people that don't overlap, right? Either you've got people in your organization that you really didn't intend to include, or you have people in your organization that you intend to include, but they don't feel included. Now you're going to have disengagement problems. So I'm asking, if you are participating in these surveys, make sure you ask the next question, the follow-up question, which is, for whom is this a wonderful place to be? Not just is it, yes or no, because everybody's going to have a little bit different experience depending on where they work, who they work for, what department they're in, what they look like, what they bring to the table, what their background is. All of these things matter when we're talking about our culture. And if we're not very clear about who feels included and why, and who doesn't and why, and whom we intend to include and why, we can start to have really big culture problems in a hurry because we get a culture we don't intend. Now, if you've never participated in a survey like this, let me give you just my 2 cents on where you should start. There are a number of companies, a number of survey companies that are happy to give you a badge for your website if you meet minimum thresholds. But I'm going to ask you, there are kind of 2 things that I want you to think about. Number one, should we really market something we don't understand or something that we're not digging deep enough on? That's number one. And number 2 is, do we want the badge or do we want to do the work? And if you want to do the work, if you really want to understand who doesn't feel included in our organization, what do we need to do about that? Where are the gaps in our culture? Where are the gaps in our ability to be inclusive? Then I'm going to ask you to stay away from those badge driven or medal driven surveys for just a little bit at least, and start by doing the work internally that you need to do. And one way to do that is with a tool I use. It's called the Spectra Diversity Inclusion Assessment. The Spectra Diversity Inclusion Assessment, or SDIA, measures your culture across 5 different dimensions. 3 of them are organizational: management, culture, and what they call the 3 Ps: policies, practices, procedures. Those are the 3 organizational measures, but they also measure on the individual level in the same survey. They measure individual beliefs and interpersonal skills and interpersonal behaviors. And when you put those organizational dimensions together with the personal dimensions, the individual dimensions, because really at the end of the day, culture is made up of all of those interactions we have with our colleagues, right? When you put all of those together, you can see in aggregate who feels included, who doesn't, and why. And more specifically, what are the things that you can do to close those gaps so that you have alignment and overlap between the people that you want to include and the people that you feel included. The reason I use the SDIA specifically is, number one, it's the only survey that's statistically validated at both the organizational and individual level in the same survey. So people answer questions about their own behaviors, about their experience with the organization. For example, one question might be, I seek perspectives from people who are different than me when I make a decision, right? That's probably not exactly the way it's worded, but something similar to that, right? So that's a self-reported behavior. I either do that or I don't, or I do that to some extent or lesser extent, right? But then there are also these organizational questions about how the company shows up for that individual employee. When we overlay those answers with demographic data, it becomes very clear where the work needs to be done, for whom, and on whose behalf it needs to be done, and kind of what, not just the work that is left, but what are we already doing that we can celebrate? And this is the reason I use this tool. I think it's very valuable for organizations to look across all of these dimensions, because it tells us, where do we need to focus our energies? Do we need to focus in management, training and coaching? Do we need to focus on, being explicit about our values and our mission statement? Do we need to focus on, revamping our policies and procedures so that they're more equitable? Do we need to pay more attention to how our policies and procedures are enforced or, managed day to day? Do our people need training? Do we have people that are poor job fit, on a large scale? And what do we need to do about that? So I think it's a really important survey to take. It'll help you understand kind of where you sit, not just within the microcosm of your own company, but also there's a maturity model that's assigned to each of those 5 dimensions, so you'll know exactly where you sit relative to the industry broadly, or relative to employers broadly, along those along that maturity model. So you might be a level 2 in some cases, a level 3 or 4 in others, and it can help you see kind of where you fit in on that bell curve. I think this is a really great tool for people who are considering starting to survey their employees, because it really does answer some of those tougher questions. And the focus is on what can we be proud of and what work do we need to do, rather than what badge are we going to get for this work, or how are we going to market our great results, right? I think the marketing should always come after you've done the work, not before. If you are interested in doing this kind of work, if you're interested in learning more about the Spectra Diversity Inclusion Assessment, if you'd like to know where your company stands, who feels included, who doesn't, and why, you can schedule time with me at workwithlaal.com. And we can talk about what you're doing today, what you'd like to know, and how you'd like to measure. It's always good, especially if you're just getting started in diversity and inclusion work in your organization, or, promoting inclusive leadership in your organization. Having that baseline measurement before the work begins is really beneficial to showing progress in the work that you're doing. So then you're actually setting measurable targets based on metrics, based on real data, rather than just activity targets that may or may not move the needle on the culture in your organization. So if this is something that interests you, by all means, I have the hiccups, set up some time with me at workwithlaal.com. Now, you're going to want to stick with me this week, because I have some exciting stuff coming up. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern this week, every weekday, I'm going to be giving you tips for how to reward your ERG, or employee resource group leaders. It's not all about the money, although that is a component. So there's a little teaser for you, but 5 different ways to reward ERG leaders every day, one a day, every day at 4 p.m. Eastern, right here. And on Thursday for the Including You podcast, I have a really great guest. Her name is Sophia Lewis, and she is one of the co-founders of Tinted Glass BIPOC Careers. And what she does is, it's basically a place where employees can go to basically report on what they really think about the companies that they work for. And what's different about this than, like, say, a glass door is tinted glass is specifically designed for Black and Brown employees to have a voice and have a say. And so this episode is titled Rethinking Accountability. And she talks about the journey to create this company and what she hopes to accomplish with her work. So you'll want to join me Thursday at noon Eastern, right here on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube for that conversation. Absolutely fascinating woman, and a great company. And I hope that you will tune in for that. If you can't catch us live at noon Eastern on Thursday, you can always catch it, on replay on any of those channels, on my YouTube channel at Lead at Any Level, or you can catch it on Friday as part of the Living Corporate podcast. We are a Friday series within that large Living Corporate umbrella. And so you can find Living Corporate wherever you go for your audio podcast, whether it's, Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, or I don't know, there are probably a bunch of other ones. But anyway, you'll want to make sure you catch that. And then I will see you again next week, when I will be back from vacation, and I will have more exciting news and more essential lessons in inclusive leadership. Until then, have a great week.